In 1970, Soviet engineers began drilling into the Earth's crust. They wanted to see how deep they could go. 12 kilometers down, they found something that shouldn't have been there. Water, saturated through rock, at pressures that every model said would make it impossible. Microscopic fossils of ancient life, intact, at depths where nothing was supposed to survive, and temperatures climbing so far beyond predictions that the drill itself began to fail. They stopped. The project was shut down. Officially, the money ran out. But here's what most people never hear. The Soviets weren't the only ones who tried to punch through the crust. The Americans tried it first, off the coast of Mexico, in 1961. Project Mahol. And they stopped too. Right when things got strange. Every time we drill deep enough, we hit the same wall. Readings that don't match the models. Instruments that behave in ways no one can explain. And then, silence. The project ends. The data gets filed away, and nobody talks about it again. Tonight, we're going to talk about it. Not just the boreholes, the seismic pulses with no identified source, the ancient maps that chart coastlines nobody should have seen, the underground cities carved so deep that no one knows who built the lowest levels, and the one detail that appears in the oldest texts of Sumeria, Tibet, India, and the Americas, cultures that never met, never traded, never shared a language, but all described the same thing, a world beneath this one, still running, still waiting. Close your eyes if you'd like. You won't need visuals for this. The world I'm building exists better in shadow, in the space between memory and stone. Before we go deeper, if this kind of story speaks to you, a quiet like helps others find these late-night journeys. I am curious too. Where in the world are you drifting off from tonight? What time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. Now settle in. Let the story unfold at its own pace. There is no rush. We have all night. Beneath the continents, beyond the reach of any drill or any light, lies a world that ancient maps, monks and explorers all described but that modern science has chosen for the most part to leave alone. From the frozen silence of Antarctica to the whispering caverns beneath the Himalayas, fragments of evidence suggest that the Earth may not be as solid, as simple or as silent as we have been told. Old seismographs record rhythmic pulses with no identified source. Myths from every inhabited continent speak of a hidden kingdom, a vast civilization that withdrew underground after a great cataclysm roughly 12,000 years ago. Their machines, some say, may still hum. Their archives may still whisper through stone. Tonight, we descend into the quiet heart of the planet. We follow the signals, the legends, and the buried history beneath our feet. And we ask a question that has haunted explorers for centuries. What if humanity's greatest empire never vanished at all? What if it simply went deeper? Let us begin where the first whispers surfaced, in the corners of history where fact and folklore blur together. According to one account that has circulated in esoteric literature since the late 19th century, miners working near the city of Khabarovsk in eastern Russia in 1834 reportedly broke through a layer of limestone and found a tunnel that did not appear natural. The walls were said to be smooth, as if shaped by tools that left no trace of chisel or hammer. A faint current of warm air moved through the passage, which made no sense at that depth beneath frozen soil. One of the miners was said to have described a large chamber beyond the tunnel, a place where metal pillars supported a dome of dark stone. No independent verification of this account has ever been produced, and it may well be apocryphal. But it belongs to a tradition of such reports that emerged throughout the 19th century, each one building on the last. Similar fragments appeared elsewhere. In 1871, French explorers mapping caverns near the Pyrenees reportedly found engraved tablets showing cities connected by underground corridors. The markings, according to the account, were not Latin or Greek or Egyptian. Whether these tablets existed, and if so where they went, has never been established. But the reports fed a growing body of speculation that civilizations older than any known to archaeology had once operated beneath the Earth's surface. Between 1906 and 1908, the Swedish explorer Sven Hedin undertook his third and greatest expedition into Tibet, mapping the Trans-Himalaya range and discovering the sources of the Brahmaputra, Indus and Sutlej rivers. His primary mission was geographic, not mystical. But during his travels, Hedin encountered Tibetan monks who spoke of hidden realms beneath the mountains. kingdoms of light governed by beings of great age and wisdom. These accounts, which Hedin recorded alongside his meticulous scientific observations, would later be connected by other writers to the legend of Agartha, a concept popularised in the West by the French occultist Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvedre in 1886 and later by the Polish explorer Ferdynand Ossendowski, who in his 1922 book Beasts, Men and Gods described monks telling him of an underground kingdom whose ruler was called the King of the World. Whether Hedin's Tibetan informants were describing the same tradition is uncertain, but the overlap between his field notes and the Agarthan legends noticed by later researchers proved difficult to dismiss entirely. When the 20th century began, those stories started to intersect with something stranger: technology. In the early 1940s, an American factory worker named Richard Shaver sent letters to Amazing Stories magazine, then edited by Ray Palmer, claiming that while working with industrial equipment, he had begun to hear voices. They spoke of an ancient empire deep inside the earth whose machines still ran after tens of thousands of years. He described them as remnants of the Elder Race, humans who had fled underground when the sun became hostile. Palmer published Shaver's accounts beginning in 1943, presenting them partly as fiction, though Shaver insisted until the end of his life that they were factual. The so-called Shaver mystery generated an enormous reader response, with many writing in to describe similar experiences, dreams of vast subterranean cities glowing with artificial light, silent railways running through tunnels of obsidian, and air that shimmered like heat, although no flame burned. Scientists remained silent or dismissive, but not everyone did. In late 1946, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, the American polar explorer, led Operation High Jump, a massive US Navy expedition to Antarctica involving approximately 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft. Officially, it was a training and scientific mission to test cold weather equipment and establish the Antarctic research base Little America 4. But its scale was unusual for peacetime, and it has inspired decades of speculation. Accounts attributed to Byrd's personal diary, which circulated through private channels beginning in the 1950s, described green lands beyond the ice and machines rising vertically from the snow. It must be said clearly that no authenticated version of this diary has ever been verified by historians or Byrd's estate. The documents that circulated were unsigned, undated, and impossible to trace to their origin. Mainstream scholars treat them as apocryphal. But the scale of Operation High Jump remains a matter of public record, and the expedition's conclusion after only about 8 weeks, shorter than originally planned, was never fully explained to the press at the time. By the middle of the 20th century, a web of stories had emerged. Russian tunnels, Tibetan legends, Shaver's voices, Byrd's flight, all pointing toward a single unsettling idea: that humanity's first and greatest empire did not vanish. It retreated. Some called it Lemuria, others called it the Atlantean Continuum or the Agarthan Network. The names changed, but the structure of the story remained remarkably constant across cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Let us stay with that thought for a moment. The consistency of the story is itself worth considering. When one culture tells a tale of underground kingdoms, it can be dismissed as local folklore. When dozens of cultures, unconnected by trade or language, tell versions of the same tale, the anthropological question shifts. It is no longer about whether the story is true, it is about why so many people remembered the same thing. To explore that question, we need to look at the maps that should not exist. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis completed a map unlike any other of his era. Drawn on gazelle skin and signed in his own hand, it showed the western coasts of Europe and Africa, the eastern edges of the Americas, and at the very bottom, an outline that appeared to be Antarctica. The strange part was not just the inclusion of this southern landmass, it was the detail with which it was rendered. Mountains, river deltas, and bays were drawn with a precision that would not be matched by European cartography for centuries. Yet Antarctica, as far as official history tells us, was not sighted until 1820, when the Russian expedition of Fabian von Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev recorded the Fimbul ice shelf. Piri Reis himself noted in the margins that his chart was a composite, copied from maps drawn in the time of Alexander the Great, and from charts of the early kings of the sea. These sources, he said, were ancient. In the 1950s, a retired captain named Arlington Mallory argued that the Antarctic coastline on the map appeared to show the continent free of ice, suggesting that the original source maps had been drawn when the land was still exposed. Geological records indicate that such conditions may have existed more than 6,000 years ago, and some estimates push that date far further back. Now, it is equally important to note that many scholars interpret the southern landmass on the Piri-Reis map not as Antarctica, but as a distorted depiction of South America's southern coast. Cartographic historian Gregory McIntosh concluded that the map was not unusually accurate for its time, and that the Antarctic interpretation requires significant manipulation of the map's grid system. The debate is unresolved, but the map exists, and its ambiguity is itself a kind of evidence, not of a hidden civilization necessarily, but of knowledge whose origins remain unexplained. The Piri-Reis map was not alone. The French geographer Philippe Boichet presented a map of the southern polar regions that is often dated to 1737 but was likely published in 1739, based on the date inscribed on the map itself. Boichet's chart appeared to divide the Antarctic landmass into two separate bodies, with a waterway between them. In the mid-20th century, seismic surveys confirmed that Antarctica does indeed consist of two main land bodies, separated by subglacial mountains. However, it is important to note that Boichet's own map includes the words conjecturé and soupçonné, meaning conjectured and suspected, on the southern landmass. Boichet was a theoretical geographer who based his speculation on reports of icebergs from French explorers, reasoning that large ice formations must originate from rivers flowing off a mountainous southern continent. His two landmass depiction was a hypothesis, not a copy from ancient sources. Whether his educated guess happened to align with geological reality through insight, logic, or sheer coincidence remains a matter of interpretation. Even earlier, the Orontius Phineus map of 1531 portrays Antarctica's rivers and valleys in remarkable proportion. The latitudes and longitudes align with modern readings within a few degrees. The implication, if taken at face value, is that someone long before recorded history had charted the southern pole from above, an impossible task for any known civilization before the invention of aircraft or satellites. Historians often explain these maps as imaginative composites or fortunate guesses, and in many cases that explanation is sufficient. But when similar anomalies appear across multiple continents and centuries, coincidence begins to lose its foothold. Now let your breathing slow a little. Feel the pillow beneath your head. We're going deeper. In December of 1946, Admiral Byrd's fleet arrived in Antarctic waters. What happened next belongs partly to the historical record and partly to rumour, and the border between the two has never been clearly drawn. The official mission logs describe routine surveys and equipment tests. The unofficial accounts, drawn from letters, interviews and fragments that surfaced over decades, describe something else entirely. Regions of warmth where there should have been only ice. Radar anomalies suggesting structures beneath the frozen surface. Magnetic fluctuations that caused compasses to spin without settling. Since Byrd's time, Antarctica has remained the most restricted continent on Earth. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty prohibits military activity and limits exploration to approved scientific research. Even satellite imagery of certain sectors, particularly around Queen Maud Land and Wilkes Land, has at times appeared blurred or overlaid. Whether this is routine image processing or deliberate obscuration depends on whom you ask. But the instruments tell their own story. In the 1990s, the existence of Lake Vostok was confirmed through ice-penetrating radar and satellite altimetry, though it had been theorized since the 1960s based on seismic data. The lake lies beneath more than 3 kilometers of ice, and appears to have been sealed from the surface for millions of years. Radar mapping revealed what some researchers interpreted as unusual formations beneath the lake bed, including linear features and right-angled patterns. Whether these represent natural geological structures or something else remains a matter of interpretation. The scientific consensus favours natural explanations, including pressure ridges and sedimentary layering. When Russian scientists drilled into Lake Vostok in 2012, the project generated both excitement and controversy. The borehole penetrated the lake's surface, and water rose within the shaft before freezing. The primary concern was contamination, both of the lake by drilling fluid and of samples by surface microbes. The scientific results, when eventually published, revealed evidence of microbial life in the accretion ice, though the findings were debated. Much of the raw data from deeper drilling remains restricted. The lake's sealed ecosystem, its unusual chemistry, and the challenges of accessing it without contamination make it one of the most scientifically interesting locations on Earth, and whatever it contains has been isolated from the surface for a span of time that dwarfs all of human history. In 2016, NASA's IceBridge mission recorded localized heat anomalies beneath the Ross Ice Shelf, zones of warmth large enough to support liquid water inside solid ice. The readings pointed to possible geothermal activity from a volcanic heat source beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, though the exact mechanism was not fully resolved. Then, in 2019, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory announced the detection of a massive cavity beneath the Thwaites Glacier, nearly 300 meters tall and roughly the size of Manhattan. Scientists attributed the void to warm ocean water intruding beneath the glacier, accelerating melting from below. The finding was alarming for climate scientists, though entirely explicable by known oceanographic processes. Still, the sheer scale of the hidden void, growing unseen beneath kilometers of ice, carried an almost mythic quality that was not lost on those who study the ancient legends. The early polar explorers offered their own accounts, long before radar and satellites existed. During the 1930s, the British Graham Land expedition mapped portions of the Antarctic Peninsula and documented the strange acoustic qualities of ice tunnels, where wind could produce eerie whistling and resonant tones. Such phenomena are well understood today as products of wind interacting with ice formations of varying density and shape, but to explorers encountering them for the first time, the sounds could seem almost intentional. Various accounts from mid-20th century Antarctic expeditions describe unusual observations, from odd lights on the horizon to unexplained instrument readings. A Chilean pilot is said to have reported an oval opening in the ice near the South Magnetic Pole, and Argentine researchers reportedly recorded seismic patterns of unusual regularity beneath the continental plateau. These accounts, which circulate primarily in alternative history literature rather than scientific journals, are difficult to verify independently. They could reflect genuine anomalies, misinterpreted natural phenomena, or the embellishments that naturally accumulate around remote and mysterious places. What they share is a common thread, the sense that Antarctica harbours something beneath its ice that we have not yet fully accounted for. Theories about these phenomena range from the mundane to the extraordinary. Some geologists point to subglacial volcanic activity or the slow movement of ice sheets as explanations. Others note that the precision and regularity of certain readings are difficult to reconcile with natural processes alone. And then there are those who look to the legends. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind. The Tibetan texts describe Agartha, the subterranean refuge of the enlightened. Norse sagas tell of Svartalfheim, the world of the dark elves who forged beneath mountains. The Hopi people of North America remember their ancestors emerging from Sipapu, openings in the earth that led from a hidden world after a great flood. The Sumerians wrote of the Abzu, the domain of fresh waters beneath the ground ruled by the god Enki, bringer of wisdom and craft. In India's oldest texts, the Nagas, serpentine beings of great intelligence, were said to live in jewelled cities beneath rivers and mountains, dating from a time when the surface was scorched by celestial fire. Celtic tradition remembers the Tuatha De Danann, a radiant race said to have retreated into the hollow hills after their defeat by mortal men. The Greeks told of the Telchines, forgers who crafted the weapons of the gods and were eventually banished beneath the waves. These stories span continents and millennia, and yet they describe the same architecture. A world beneath the world, kingdoms of light without sun, rulers who observe but do not intervene, engineers who build with sound and sustain their cities with the planet's own warmth. In every version, these beings do not perish. They withdraw. They go deeper. Now, the rational explanation is that these are universal myths, expressions of a shared human psychology. Every culture fears the underground and simultaneously romanticizes what might lie hidden. That is a valid interpretation, and one that most anthropologists would endorse. But there is another possibility, one that the myths themselves seem to suggest, that the stories are not metaphors, that they are memories. Let us turn now to the experiments, the moments when modern science tried to look beneath the crust and found more than it expected. In 1692, the English astronomer Edmund Halley, the man whose name graces the famous comet, proposed that Earth was not a solid sphere, but a series of concentric shells, each separated by vast hollow spaces. His reasoning came from irregularities in compass readings, magnetic variations that he argued could only be explained by multiple magnetic poles rotating within the planet. In Halley's time, the idea was not dismissed as fantasy. It was treated as a serious scientific hypothesis, an attempt to explain the inexplicable. Over the next century, the model was tested and ultimately undermined. The French mathematician Pierre Bouguer, while measuring gravity near the Chimborazo volcano in Ecuador during the 1730s, conducted vertical deflection experiments that tentatively falsified the hollow Earth idea. His measurements show that the mountain exerted gravitational pull, implying that the Earth possessed substantial mass throughout its interior. The Schiehallion experiment of 1774, led by Neville Maskelyne and later analysed by Charles Hutton, confirmed these findings more definitively. The Earth, it turned out, was far denser than surface rock alone would suggest, a finding incompatible with vast hollow spaces within. In 1818, an American Army officer named John Cleves Symmes Jr. brought the theory into public life. He distributed circulars across the United States declaring that the Earth was hollow and habitable within, containing concentric spheres, one inside the other, and open at both poles. Symmes petitioned Congress for funding to mount an expedition to the North Pole to locate these openings. The proposal was denied, but his followers spread his ideas widely. Newspapers mocked him, but his vision of inner continents, temperate climates, and ancient civilizations beneath the Arctic ice proved remarkably durable. One of Symmes' associates, Jeremiah Reynolds, continued the cause with greater political skill. Reynolds lobbied Congress and multiple administrations for a naval expedition to the southern seas. His efforts eventually contributed to the authorization of the United States Exploring Expedition, which set sail in 1838 under Lieutenant Charles Wilkes. Officially, the expedition charted Pacific Islands, mapped portions of the Antarctic coastline, and confirmed Antarctica as a continent. Reynolds himself was not aboard, having fallen out with the Navy by the time of departure, but his private writings, later examined by historians, contain references to unusual magnetic phenomena observed at high southern latitudes, passages that some have read as suggestive, though far from conclusive. Modern geophysics has, of course, developed far more detailed models of the Earth's interior. Seismology tells us the planet has a solid inner core, a liquid outer core, a thick mantle, and a thin crust. The hollow Earth theory in its original form has been definitively disproven, and yet certain anomalies persist. Zones of unusually low density exist beneath the Pacific and beneath Africa, vast enough to hold entire continents. Some geophysicists call these large low-shear velocity provinces, or LLSVPs. Their structure remains poorly understood. They sit at the boundary between the core and the mantle, and they behave differently from anything around them. Some scientists describe them as thermochemical piles, ancient reservoirs of material that have remained distinct for billions of years. Others simply admit that we do not yet know what they are. The point is not that the Earth is hollow. The point is that what lies beneath us is far stranger and far less understood than most people assume. Let us go deeper still. In 1949, according to accounts that have circulated in fringe literature, miners working near Norilsk in Siberia reported a persistent humming sound rising from beneath the permafrost. The noise was said to be low, steady, and mechanical, like distant turbines turning in a sealed chamber. No published scientific record of this event has been found, and it may belong to the same tradition of embellished mining folklore that produced the Kola borehole hell sounds legend. But the story endures, as such stories tend to do, because it touches something that resonates with deeper questions about what lies beneath us. The humming was not unique. In 1970, the Soviet Union began drilling the Kola superdeep borehole on the Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia. Over the next 2 decades, they reached a maximum depth of 12,262 metres in 1989, roughly 7.5 miles into the Earth. It remains the deepest vertical borehole on the planet. The project yielded extraordinary and verified scientific discoveries. The expected transition to basaltic rock at around 7 kilometres was never found, overturning long-held geological assumptions. The deep crust was saturated with water, something previously thought impossible at those pressures. Microscopic plankton fossils were discovered intact at depths far greater than any life was supposed to exist. But there were also things that were harder to explain. At extreme depths, temperatures rose far more steeply than models predicted. Reaching 180 degrees Celsius, and causing drill bits to fail. The famous urban legend of the sounds of hell, recorded at the Kola borehole, is almost certainly a hoax, likely derived from audio of a 1970s Italian horror film called Barren Blood, looped and distorted. The hoax first appeared in a Finnish newspaper in the 1990s and spread rapidly, but beneath the myth, there was a genuine scientific puzzle. The borehole's behaviour at extreme depth defied multiple predictions, and the project was ultimately wound down by 1995, officially due to lack of funding after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Across the globe, deep Earth microphones and magnetic sensors continued to pick up unexplained signals. In 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recorded a powerful ultra-low-frequency underwater sound in the South Pacific. Nicknamed Quote 1, the sound was initially mysterious enough to generate widespread speculation. NOAA later concluded it was consistent with a large ice quake, the fracturing and carving of a large iceberg. The explanation is broadly accepted by the scientific community, though the sound's unusual characteristics continue to intrigue some researchers. In the early 2000s, reports emerged from geological survey teams working in Patagonia of unusual vibrations recorded at night while mapping glacial melt cavities. According to these accounts, which have not been published in peer-reviewed literature, instruments detected vibrations travelling laterally through rock rather than vertically. Such reports are difficult to evaluate without access to the original data, and they could have any number of mundane explanations, from equipment artefacts to distant industrial activity. But they join a growing catalogue of anecdotal accounts from deep Earth researchers who describe encountering signals that do not fit neatly into existing models. These episodes, taken individually, are curiosities. Taken together, they form a pattern of sounds, vibrations, and energy signatures emanating from beneath the crust in ways that do not always conform to existing geological models. Ancient records describe the Earth's interior in language that, while mythological, carries suggestive parallels. Sumerian texts from the city of Eridu describe the Abzu, the underground freshwater domain of Enki, as a living place, humming with creative energy, from which wisdom and craft flow upward to the surface. The Vedic tradition speaks of Vayu, the cosmic wind, whose breath sustains all living things, a force that in some interpretations pervades not only the atmosphere, but the interior of the Earth as well. Tibetan Buddhist texts describe Mount Kailash as a sacred axis of the world, beneath which spiritual forces are said to resonate, and some esoteric traditions hold that hidden chambers beneath the mountain contain devices or relics from an earlier age, though these claims exist outside mainstream Buddhist scholarship. It would be easy to dismiss these descriptions as pure metaphor. The Earth is, after all, a noisy planet, tectonic plates grind, magma moves, and pressure waves ripple through rock at every scale. But the recurring motif across unrelated cultures of deliberate rhythmic forces operating beneath the surface is at least worth noting. Whether these traditions preserve a memory of real geological phenomena interpreted through a mythological lens, or whether they reflect a universal human tendency to animate the underground with purpose, remains an open question. Let us pause here, let the silence settle, feel the darkness behind your eyelids. You're safe, and the night is long. Now let us consider what might have driven any civilization, real or imagined, to seek refuge beneath the Earth. For that, we need to look at the cataclysm. Around 12,900 years ago, something happened to the planet. The warming trend that had been slowly ending the last ice age reversed itself abruptly. Temperatures plunged, ice returned, entire species vanished. This period is called the Younger Dryas, and it lasted roughly 1,200 years before conditions warmed again. Its cause remains one of the most debated questions in Earth science. The mainstream explanation involves a disruption to Atlantic Ocean circulation. As glaciers melted, vast quantities of fresh water poured into the sea, disrupting the thermohaline conveyor that distributes heat from the tropics to northern latitudes. The result was a sudden return to near-glacial cold. This is a well-supported hypothesis backed by decades of oceanographic data. But in 2007, a team led by geophysicist Richard Firestone proposed an additional trigger. They suggested that fragments of a disintegrating comet struck the Earth near the Laurentide ice sheet in North America, unleashing firestorms, triggering massive meltwater floods, and injecting enough debris into the atmosphere to create an impact winter. Their evidence included layers of soot, carbon spherules, and nanodiamonds found in sediment deposits across 4 continents, all dating to roughly 12,900 years before the present. These microscopic diamonds form only under extreme heat and pressure, the kind produced by cosmic impact or massive solar radiation. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains controversial. A 2023 review in Earth Science Reviews described what it called an overwhelming synchronicity of geochemical evidence, while a comprehensive refutation published the same year in the same field argued that the evidence was inconsistent and methodologically flawed. The debate continues. What is less debated is the devastation. Mammoths, mastodons, and dozens of other large animals disappeared within this window. The Clovis culture, one of the most widespread early human populations in North America, collapsed. Across the planet, the geological record shows a boundary layer of ash and soot, the so-called black mat, marking this moment like a scar. And then something remarkable happened. Almost immediately after the Younger Dryas ended, approximately 11,600 years ago, human civilization appeared to leap forward. In southern Turkey, at a site called Göbekli Tepe, people who should have been simple hunter-gatherers carved enormous T-shaped pillars weighing up to 10 tons each and erected them in elaborate circular enclosures. The site dates to approximately 9,600 BCE, making it roughly 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, and predating the invention of pottery, metalworking, and the wheel. What is even more striking is that Göbekli Tepe was intentionally buried. The builders, or their descendants, filled the entire complex with rubble and soil, preserving it beneath their artificial mound. Why anyone would do this remains one of the great archaeological puzzles. Some researchers suggest it was a form of ritual decommissioning. Others have noted that burying the site was the most effective way to preserve it, as if the builders wanted future generations to find it intact. On Pillar 43, known as the Vulture Stone, a series of animal carvings have drawn intense speculation. In a 2017 paper published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, University of Edinburgh engineers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis proposed that the carvings represent constellations and that the stone functions as a date stamp for approximately 10,950 BCE, roughly coinciding with the proposed Younger Dryas impact event. Their interpretation remains disputed by the archaeological team responsible for the site, who argue that the carvings are more likely related to funerary rituals and the journey of the soul to the afterlife. But the timing is suggestive. Here is a monumental site built by people who possess knowledge and organizational skills far beyond what the standard historical model predicts, constructed in the immediate aftermath of a global catastrophe, and then deliberately sealed for preservation. The flood myths of the ancient world tell the same story in different words. The Sumerians called it the deluge. The Babylonians preserved it as the tale of Atrahasis. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion's flood. In every version, a warning comes. A chosen few are told to prepare, and they do not flee upward, they descend. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature, mentions the Abzu, the underground domain of Enki, where waters are pure and foundations are bright. In the Andes, Quechua myths tell of Pachamama's womb, where the first ancestors sheltered until the sun returned. The Hopi remember a time when the world above burned and their ancestors fled through Sipapu, holes in the earth opened by benevolent spirits. When they emerged, the surface was silent and changed. In 1936, the French archaeologist Henri Breuil studied Paleolithic cave paintings in the Pyrenees and noted a curious pattern. Many of the figures, usually animals, were drawn facing downward or entering openings in the rock. They move into the earth, he wrote, as if seeking safety. Radiocarbon dating later confirmed that these images were created around the same period as the end of the Younger Dryas, the dawn of agriculture, the rebirth of surface civilization, and perhaps the closing of the gates below. Hindu cosmology describes cyclical destructions called pralayas. In the Matsya Purana, the god Vishnu warns of a flood caused by the sun itself. When the 7 rays devour the worlds, the wise will hide within the womb of the earth. Tibetan texts call this era the age of the burning sky, when a burst of solar energy forced the enlightened to retreat into the inner realms of Agartha. The descriptions of these refugees are remarkably consistent. Cities of stone that glowed without flame, powered by the eternal fire of the world's core. You might wonder, if these refugees existed, where is the physical evidence? That question leads us somewhere unexpected, to the lights. In 1926, Nicholas Roerich, the Russian painter and explorer, travelled through the Himalayas on an expedition sponsored by the American Museum of Natural History. His journey took him across Tibet, Mongolia, and the Altai Mountains. During the expedition, his Tibetan guide spoke repeatedly of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom beneath the surface that radiated its own light. Roerich recorded the stories with the calm of an ethnographer, but his words carried undertones of wonder. The monks, he wrote, describe this world as a land of eternal brightness, where the air trembles like gold and the soil glows beneath the feet. The legend of a luminous underground world is far older than Roerich. In the Mahabharata, one of India's great epic poems, Nagaloka is a subterranean realm where serpentine beings guard cities lit by radiant crystals. Light does not come from the sun, but from stones that breathe fire without smoke. Similar motifs appear in early Christian mysticism. The 4th century monk Ephraim the Syrian wrote of a paradise beneath the roots of mountains, where lamps never extinguish and rivers shine with their own light. The Tibetan Kalachakra teachings describe Shambhala's capital, Kalapa, illuminated by a central radiance that needs no sun or flame. Reports of luminescence in deep environments persist into the modern era. Mining folklore from southern Africa includes accounts of chambers that seem to glow faintly after lamps were extinguished, an effect that geologists would later attribute to triboluminescence, the emission of light when certain crystals are fractured or stressed. Quartz, calcite, and other common minerals can produce brief flashes of light under mechanical pressure. While rarely dramatic enough to illuminate a room, the phenomenon is well documented and entirely natural. To miners working by candlelight in the deep earth, however, such effects could easily have seemed otherworldly. In 2009, speleologists exploring the Moval Cave in Romania discovered a sealed ecosystem that had been isolated from the surface for millions of years. The air was toxic to humans, yet the walls emitted a faint greenish light attributed to chemosynthetic biofilms, organisms that derive energy not from sunlight but from chemical reactions in the rock. Life had found a way to create its own light in total darkness. These are scientific facts. Triboluminescence is real. Chemosynthetic life is real. The question is whether ancient peoples encountered these phenomena in caves and underground spaces and wove them into their mythologies, or whether their myths describe something we have not yet found. If a natural process can produce faint illumination in total darkness, what might an intentional one achieve? Consider the properties of mica, a mineral that appears in ancient construction sites around the world. At Teotihuacan in Mexico, thick sheets of mica were discovered lining the walls of an underground chamber beneath the Pyramid of the Sun. Mica is a powerful electrical insulator. It resists heat. It can store electromagnetic charge. Its presence in a ritual chamber, buried beneath a pyramid, serving no obvious structural purpose, has never been satisfactorily explained. Some researchers propose it was decorative. Others suggest it had a functional role, perhaps as a component in a system we no longer understand. Mica has also been found in ancient construction sites in Egypt, India, and Peru. In each case, it lines chambers or passages that have no other obvious use. The material is rare, difficult to transport, and serves no aesthetic purpose in a dark underground room. Its presence suggests intent, and its properties suggest a connection to energy. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the narrative slow. Feel the stillness of the room around you. Notice how the air feels against your skin. The world above is going about its business, cars on distant roads, planes crossing the sky, the hum of electricity in walls. But beneath all of it, beneath the concrete and the soil and the rock, there is another kind of silence, older, deeper, patient. Now let us speak of the records themselves, the inner libraries. Throughout history, civilizations have faced the same problem. How do you preserve knowledge across time? Paper burns, clay crumbles, even stone erodes. Every medium is temporary. Every archive is vulnerable. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed. Whether by fire, neglect, or political expediency is debated, but the result is the same. An incalculable volume of human understanding was lost. If a civilization knew that catastrophe was approaching, if they had witnessed or predicted the kind of planetary devastation that the younger Dryas represents, they would need a medium more durable than anything on the surface. They would need to store their knowledge inside the Earth itself. The ancient texts describe exactly this. The Book of Enoch, an apocryphal Hebrew scripture excluded from the standard biblical canon, speaks of stone tablets buried beneath the mountain of the east, containing the secrets of the Watchers, a class of angelic beings who descended to earth and shared forbidden knowledge with humanity. The tablets are described as imperishable, written in a language that predates all human tongues. In Mesopotamia, inscriptions from the city of Sippar describe a house of tablets sealed before the flood by the sage Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah. The tablets were placed in a chamber of deep stone, and the inscription says they will endure until the waters recede, and a worthy king descends to retrieve them. No such chamber has been found at Sippar, though the site has never been fully excavated. The Mayan Popol Vuh describes writings hidden in the darkness, safe from fire and flood. The Vedic Agni Purana mentions books that cannot burn. In every case, the method of preservation is the same. The knowledge is transmuted from surface material into underground substance. The library becomes not a building, but an extension of the earth. Modern physicists studying phonon trapping have demonstrated that certain crystalline structures can retain vibrational patterns for extraordinarily long periods. Quartz, in particular, has been shown to store data at the molecular level, using laser-inscribed nanostructures. Scientists at the University of Southampton have created what they call 5-dimensional data storage in quartz glass, capable of preserving information for billions of years. They describe it as memory crystal. The ancients might have used a different term. The idea that knowledge can be stored in stone is no longer science fiction. It is current research. The question is whether anyone did it first, long before us. According to accounts preserved in esoteric literature, a monk named Tashi Dorje wrote in 1889 about underground chambers beneath the monastery of Tashilhunpo in Tibet. He is said to have described corridors carved into bedrock leading to vaults containing tablets of black stone with faint inscriptions in an unknown language. Whether this account is genuine has never been independently verified, and no such chambers have been documented by modern archaeologists with access to the monastery. But the story carries the same hallmarks as others we have encountered: an underground archive, an unreadable script, a knowledge older than memory. Parallel accounts exist in South America. The Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello, one of the most important figures in Andean archaeology, conducted extensive work near Cusco and throughout Peru in the early 20th century. He documented the rich oral traditions of the Quechua people, including stories of Paititi, a hidden city beneath the mountains. Some later writers have attributed to Tello the discovery of metallic plates inscribed with unknown constellations in Andean caves, though these specific claims are difficult to trace in his published archaeological work. What is established is that Tello took indigenous oral traditions seriously as archaeological evidence, an approach that was decades ahead of his time. In Egypt, beneath the Great Sphinx, the Hall of Records is said by esoteric traditions to hold the knowledge of a civilization predating dynastic times. In 1997, seismic surveys beneath the Sphinx Plateau revealed rectangular anomalies, voids arranged symmetrically beneath the right paw. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities acknowledged the cavities but halted further investigation, stating they were of no archaeological significance. Whether that assessment was scientific or political depends on one's perspective. The Mesopotamian tradition adds its own layer. Inscriptions from the ancient city of Ur mention a house of deep knowledge, sealed during a reign that Sumerian chronology places thousands of years before the flood. The tablets within were said to be stored in a chamber of fireless light, the same phrase used by Tibetan monks and Andean storytellers separated by 10,000 miles. Modern scientists studying the acoustic properties of deep caves have discovered something remarkable. In certain chambers, at particular frequencies, sound waves echo indefinitely, as if the stone itself retains vibration. Physicists call this phonon trapping, the confinement of vibrational energy within a crystalline lattice. It has practical applications in quantum computing. But to the mystics of the ancient world, this was precisely how knowledge was stored. The spoken word preserved in vibration, waiting to be awakened. There is something haunting about this idea. That information might not require a medium at all, that it might persist as energy within the molecular structure of rock, retrievable not by reading, but by listening. Let your thoughts soften now. Imagine the weight of millennia pressing down on a chamber of stone. Imagine the silence within, total and absolute, unbroken for 10,000 years, and then imagine a faint vibration beginning, rising from somewhere even deeper, moving through the rock like a heartbeat. The question of who built such chambers, if they existed at all, leads us to the engineers. Archaeological anomalies lend quiet weight to the old stories. At the Giza Plateau in Egypt, granite blocks weighing 70 tons are cut with accuracy measurable to fractions of a millimetre. In Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman features polygonal stones that interlock so precisely that even a razor blade cannot pass between them. At the Ellora caves in India, entire temples were carved downward from single cliff tops, following mathematical symmetry that modern architects struggle to replicate. The civilizations credited with these feats left no record of how they achieved them. Some researchers suggest, carefully and with appropriate caveats, that these structures may rest on even older foundations, the work of a forgotten engineering tradition whose methods were imitated but never equalled. Reports from deep excavations occasionally surface with objects that defy easy classification. In 1912, workers in an Oklahoma coal mine reportedly extracted an iron cup from solid coal dated to over 300 million years ago. In 1852, a metallic vessel of silver and zinc was said to have been blasted from rock in Dorchester, Massachusetts. These accounts, often grouped under the category of out-of-place artifacts, are treated with deep skepticism by mainstream science, and many have been debunked or remain unverifiable. But they persist in the literature, and each one raises the same uncomfortable question. What was a manufactured object doing in rock that old? The Sumerian records describe the god Enki creating devices called Mi, instruments of divine order that regulated the flow of knowledge, water and power. The word is usually translated as divine decree, but some scholars argue it refers to physical objects, tools or machines imbued with operational purpose. Enki is depicted in cylinder seals holding what appear to be conduits or channels, and the texts describe his temple as a place where the ground murmurs and the walls hum with purpose. The Greek poet Hesiod describes Hephaestus forging automatons of gold. India's Vimana texts specify flying machines powered by mercury and vibration. Scholars interpret these as metaphors, and in most cases metaphor is the most parsimonious explanation. But the mechanical language in ancient scripture, the specificity of the instructions, the insistence on materials and measurements, these feel less like poetry and more like engineering manuals preserved in mythic form. A recurring theme in these traditions is the idea of resonance as a tool. That sound, at the right frequency, could move stone, generate energy, or store information. Modern physicists know that resonant frequencies can shatter glass, levitate small objects in acoustic experiments, and produce measurable structural effects on materials. The ancient builders may not have had the language of modern physics, but if they understood the principle, they would not have needed it. In the subterranean chambers of the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, dating to roughly 4000 BCE, an underground space called the Oracle Room produces a specific acoustic phenomenon. Any sound made within the chamber resonates at a frequency of approximately 110 Hz, a frequency that research has shown affects brain function, shifting consciousness toward a state of heightened creativity and altered perception. The chamber was not accidentally shaped. It was carved by hand from solid limestone, and its acoustic properties are too precise to be coincidental. Now imagine that principle applied on a civilizational scale. Not one chamber, but thousands, connected by tunnels, tuned to specific frequencies, forming a network that could store, transmit, and amplify energy or information across vast distances. It sounds like science fiction. But so did the idea of invisible waves carrying human voices across oceans, until Marconi built a radio. We are approaching the deeper questions now. Not questions of evidence or archaeology, but questions of meaning. If the Earth does contain remnants of a forgotten civilization, sealed beneath ice and stone, what does that say about us? About the fragility of knowledge? About the cycles of creation and collapse that seem to repeat throughout human history? Every great civilization believes itself permanent. The Sumerians built ziggurats to last forever. The Egyptians carved their names in granite to defy time. The Romans laid roads they assumed would never crumble. Each one fell, and in every case the knowledge they possessed was partially or wholly lost. The Library of Alexandria burned, and with it perhaps the greatest collection of human knowledge the ancient world had ever assembled. The Maya codices were destroyed by Spanish missionaries. The engineering techniques of the Roman aqueducts were forgotten for 1,000 years. If a civilization existed before the Younger Dryas, one sophisticated enough to chart the globe, build in stone, and understand the mechanics of the earth, it too would have faced this problem. The surface is hostile, floods, fires, impacts, ice ages. Every few thousand years the slate is wiped. But the interior of the earth does not flood. It does not burn. It does not freeze. If you wanted to preserve something forever, you would not put it in a library. You would put it in the rock. This is perhaps the most compelling argument for the legends of subterranean archives. Not that they were built by a mythical race of supermen, but that they were built by people like us, facing the same fears we face, using the most durable medium available. Stone remembers, the earth endures, and whatever was placed inside it may still be waiting. Seismologists have long known that the earth produces mysterious low-frequency vibrations that are not caused by earthquakes. These so-called microseisms, generated by ocean waves, atmospheric pressure changes and other processes, create a constant background hum. In recent decades, instruments have become sensitive enough to detect subtler signals within that noise. Some researchers have reported detecting unusual coherent vibrations, oscillations that circle the globe and repeat with unexpected regularity. A well-documented example occurred in November of 2018, when a mysterious low-frequency seismic signal was detected by instruments worldwide, pulsing in rhythmic waves for more than 20 minutes. Its source was eventually traced to volcanic activity near the island of Mayotte in the Indian Ocean, but for weeks the signal puzzled seismologists because of its unusual regularity and lack of the chaotic patterns typical of earthquakes. Episodes like this, where the Earth produces signals that initially defy explanation, are not as rare as one might think. What can be said is that the Earth's interior produces signals we do not fully understand, and that our models of deep geological processes remain incomplete. In the old Tibetan texts, the awakening of the inner world begins with sound. Monks teach that when Shambhala arises, it will be announced by a ringing beneath the mountains. The Hopi prophecies speak of the Earth's heart beating faster before the next great change. The Norse poems foretell Gjallarhorn sounding from beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the signal that the hidden realms will open once more. These are myths. They are also patterns, and the instruments are recording something. Whether what lies beneath us is the remnant of a forgotten human civilization, a natural phenomenon we do not yet understand, or something else entirely, the data continue to accumulate. Signals beneath the noise, rhythm beneath the random, faint but steady. Perhaps the old stories were never about belief. Perhaps they were about preparation, a way of telling future generations that the surface is temporary, that the deep is enduring, and that when the world above falls silent, someone, something, will still be listening from below. The truth, if it exists, may not lie in any single discovery, not in one map, one borehole, one seismic reading. It may lie in the pattern itself, in the way the same story appears independently on every continent, in the way the instruments keep detecting rhythms where there should be randomness, in the way the oldest civilizations, the ones closest in time to whatever happened 12,000 years ago, all pointed downward and said, "That is where the answers are." We may never find the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx. We may never follow the Cueva de los Tallos to its deepest chamber. We may never drill through the Antarctic ice to whatever lies beneath Lake Vostok. But the questions will remain, and every now and then, late at night, when the world is quiet and you can feel the weight of the planet beneath you, you might hear something, not with your ears, with something older, a hum, a rhythm, a pulse, steady, patient, ancient, as if the earth itself is waiting, not for permission, not for discovery, but for the right moment to remember what it knows. But the pulse is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning, because wherever the instruments have listened, wherever the drills have gone deep, wherever the old texts point toward the interior of the planet, there is one detail that appears again and again, in different languages, different centuries, different continents, but always with the same quiet insistence. The machines never stopped. That phrase echoes through the fringe literature on subterranean civilizations, and while it is not supported by verified scientific evidence, it draws on a real and puzzling phenomenon. The Earth produces low-frequency vibrations and electromagnetic signals that are not fully explained, Some readings, particularly those recorded at extreme depth or in remote polar regions, contain modulations and regularities that invite speculation. There is no direct physical evidence for ancient machines beneath the crust. No artifact has been pulled from a borehole and placed on a laboratory table. What exists is a collection of unusual readings, cultural traditions, and unanswered questions. The honest scientific position is that we do not yet fully understand the deep Earth's acoustic and electromagnetic behaviour, and in the absence of complete understanding, every explanation from the purely geological to the frankly speculative remains in play. Some physicists propose that deep geological layers could act as resonant chambers, naturally amplifying electromagnetic feedback from the planet's core. Under this model, any rhythmic pulses are a byproduct of the Earth's own thermodynamic processes, no different in principle from the hum of a transformer or the vibration of a tuning fork. The planet simply resonates, and our instruments are sensitive enough to detect it. Others suggest something more provocative, that certain signals could be the fading output of an ancient energy network, machines built before our civilization existed, still drawing power from geothermal flows deep within the mantle. A few researchers on the fringes of academic geology have proposed that such devices were constructed by the same pre-cataclysmic civilization described in the myths of Agartha and Shambhala, designed not to generate power for its own sake but to stabilize the Earth's magnetic field after a cosmic event. But the ancient descriptions are remarkably specific. In India's ancient Vimana texts, machinery is described in language that mixes the sacred and the technical. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text of disputed age and authenticity, contains passages that read more like engineering specifications than scripture, detailing propulsion systems, fuel mixtures, and structural materials. Most scholars consider these texts to be relatively modern compositions, possibly from the early 20th century, attributed retroactively to ancient sages. But the tradition they draw on, the idea of machines that fly, machines that communicate, machines that operate beneath the earth, extends back thousands of years in Indian literature, well before anyone could have been influenced by modern technology. The Greek tradition offers its own version. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, was said to build his workshop beneath volcanic mountains. His automatons were self-moving, self-regulating, and tireless. They served the gods without rest, performing tasks that today we would describe as robotic. Hephaestus himself was lame, cast out of Olympus and forced to work underground, a god who builds in isolation, beneath the surface, creating machines that never stop. The parallel to the Agarthan engineers is difficult to ignore. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of the blankets become the weight of stone, pressing gently, holding you in place. There is another dimension to this story that we have not yet explored, the kingdom of light. Every culture that describes a subterranean world describes it as luminous, not dark, not cold, not frightening. Luminous. The light does not come from the sun, it comes from within, from the walls, from the air, from the stones themselves. In the Sanskrit texts of the Mahabharata, the underground city of Nagaloka is described as shining with the brilliance of 1,000 gems. The Nagas, serpent beings of tremendous wisdom, lived in halls where crystals suspended in the ceiling cast a light so pure that no shadow fell. In the same tradition, the underground realm is described as temperate, fertile, and ageless. Time moves differently there. Those who enter do not age as they would on the surface. Tibetan Buddhist texts describe Shambhala in similar terms. The capital city of Kalapa shines with a light that has no source. The air is warm, the gardens are perpetual, and the inhabitants possess knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and the nature of consciousness that far surpasses anything on the surface. The texts are explicit. This is not heaven. It is not the afterlife. It is a physical place, hidden from the uninitiated by geography and intention. The Hopi people of the American Southwest tell of Sipapu, the place of emergence, where their ancestors lived in an illuminated underground world before climbing to the surface through a passage in the earth. The Hopi described this previous world not as a cave but as a complete realm, with its own sky, its own weather, and its own light. When corruption grew too great on the surface, the faithful were guided back underground by spirits, and the entrance was sealed. Norse mythology describes Svartalfheim, the realm of the Dark Elves, not as a place of darkness, but as a world of skilled craftsmen who work by the light of forges that never cool. The dwarves of Norse legend live beneath mountains, shaping gold and iron into objects of extraordinary power. Their realm is industrial, organised, and self-sustaining. Light comes from the furnaces that burn without fuel. What is remarkable about these accounts is their consistency. An underground world lit by its own energy, inhabited by beings of advanced knowledge, sealed from the surface by choice rather than force. The light is always described as soft, diffuse and sourceless, not like fire, not like sunlight, like something woven into the fabric of the space itself. Now, let us follow one more descent, not beneath the poles but beneath the jungle canopy of South America, into one of the most contested underground sites on Earth. The Cueva de los Tallos, the Cave of the Oil Birds, lies in the Morona Santiago province of eastern Ecuador, within the territory of the Shuar people. The cave takes its name from the oil birds that nest in its upper chambers, but its true significance, according to those who have explored it, lies far deeper than any bird has flown. The cave system extends into the earth for an unknown distance. Its upper levels are natural formations carved by water over millions of years, but deeper within, according to some accounts, the character of the space changes. Walls are said to become smoother, passages straighter, and the air, according to multiple visitors, carries a faint warmth that has no obvious source. In 1969, the Hungarian-Argentine researcher Juan Morich filed a notarized legal document with the Ecuadorian government, claiming to have discovered within the deeper sections of the cave an artificial tunnel system. He described halls large enough to house buildings, walls that appeared worked rather than eroded, and stone pedestals upon which sat what he called metallic books, thin sheets of an unknown alloy inscribed with patterns. He refused, however, to reveal the precise location of the alleged library. He said it was not meant to be opened. Not yet. In 1976, a far more formal expedition was organised. The British Ecuadorian expedition to the Cueva de los Tallos brought together over 100 participants, including military engineers, speleologists, botanists, and one name that lent the project an almost mythic quality: Neil Armstrong. The first human being to walk on the moon descended into the Earth. Armstrong's participation has never been fully explained. He offered no detailed public statement about his motivations, and his role on the expedition was largely supportive rather than scientific. But his presence attracted worldwide attention. The expedition spent weeks mapping the cave's upper chambers and collecting biological and geological samples. They found no metallic library. They found no artificial tunnels in the areas they explored. What they did document was a natural cave system of extraordinary scale and beauty, with some passages extending deep enough to suggest the system had not been fully explored. Reports of unusual magnetic readings within the cave have been mentioned in subsequent accounts, though these were never formally published in peer-reviewed literature. The Shuar people who live above the cave maintain their own oral tradition about its deeper reaches. They say it is a passage to another world, one inhabited by beings who came before humans. They call it the dwelling of the ancestors. The Ecuadorian government has intermittently restricted access to the site, and no subsequent expedition has been granted the resources or permission to explore beyond the known chambers. The cave waits, as it has waited for centuries, dark, warm, and silent. Similar stories attach themselves to underground sites across the globe. In China, beneath the Taklamakan Desert, local legends speak of Lur, the Sea of Death, a buried city that sank beneath the dunes after lights within the ground burned without flame. Chinese records from the Han Dynasty describe a settlement swallowed by sand, and modern satellite-based ground-penetrating radar has revealed rectilinear formations beneath the desert surface, aligned with magnetic north and buried under compacted sand. Excavations have never been authorized. The region remains a restricted zone. In southern Turkey, a different kind of underground world was discovered not by myth chasers, but by accident. In 1963, a man renovating his home in the town of Derinkuyu broke through a wall and discovered a passageway leading down into the rock. What lay below was an entire underground city, carved from volcanic tuff, extending at least 8 stories beneath the surface, and capable of sheltering an estimated 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food supplies. Derinkuyu is one of more than 200 underground cities discovered in the Cappadocia region, and it is connected by tunnels to other subterranean complexes miles away. The official explanation is that these cities were built as refuges during periods of invasion. possibly by early Christians fleeing Roman persecution, and that explanation is almost certainly correct for the upper levels. But the deepest sections of Derinkuyu show construction techniques that differ markedly from the rest. The stone is harder, the passages narrower, the ventilation shafts more precisely engineered. Some researchers have suggested that the lower levels predate the upper ones by thousands of years, and that the Christians did not build the underground city but expanded and repurposed one that already existed. Nobody knows who carved the original levels of Derinkuyu. Nobody knows how deep they truly go, because portions of the lower sections remain unexcavated, their entrances blocked by rubble that has never been cleared. The Turkish authorities have opened several levels to tourism, but the deepest chambers remain sealed. And so the pattern repeats. Underground spaces of remarkable precision, sealed or restricted, their origins unknown, their deepest sections unexplored. In Ecuador, in China, in Turkey, in Tibet, in Egypt, beneath the ice of Antarctica. There is one more set of artifacts worth considering. In 1938, a Chinese archaeologist named Chipute led an expedition into the Bayan Kara Ula Mountains near the border of Tibet. In a network of caves, the team reportedly discovered rows of graves containing small skeletal remains, alongside hundreds of stone discs, each about 12 inches in diameter and marked with tiny grooves spiralling from the centre outward. The discs became known as the dropper stones, and their story is among the most contested in alternative archaeology. According to accounts that first appeared in Western sources in the 1960s and 70s, analysis revealed that the grooves contained microscopic inscriptions. An alleged translation described the discs as records left by beings who crashed on Earth 12,000 years ago and were unable to leave. It must be stated plainly that the Dropper Stone narrative has severe credibility problems. No verified specimens have ever been produced for independent examination. The original research papers cited in popular accounts cannot be traced to any verifiable academic institution. Most serious researchers consider the entire story to be a modern invention, possibly originating as science fiction that was later presented as fact. But the story persists because it touches the same nerve as all the other stories we have explored tonight. The idea that somewhere within the Earth, artifacts exist that record a history we have lost. Someone, long ago, tried to leave us a message, and we have not yet learned how to read it. Perhaps we never will, or perhaps the message was never meant for us specifically, but for whoever came after. A time capsule, sealed in the most durable material available, placed in the most protected location imaginable, beneath the surface, beneath the floods, beneath the fire, beneath the ice. And so we come at last to the Whispering Archives, the final layer. In 1960, the United States Navy launched Project Mahola, an attempt to drill through the Earth's crust into the mantle. The drilling began off the coast of Mexico's Guadalupe Island, where the oceanic crust is thinner. For years, engineers worked aboard floating platforms, lowering drills through kilometers of ocean and rock, and then, without warning, funding was cut. The final borehole stopped at a depth of only 3,600 meters. The last entry in the project's internal log recorded pressure readings inconsistent with expected density, a temperature drop at the final depth, an instrument failure followed by an unidentified vibration. Official reports dismissed the anomaly as a mechanical glitch. Project Maholi was the American answer to the Soviet Kola project, and both shared a similar trajectory. Ambitious beginnings, surprising discoveries, unexplained anomalies at extreme depth, and then cancellation, attributed in both cases to funding shortfalls. Whether there were other reasons has been the subject of quiet speculation for decades. Various Antarctic research missions have used ground-penetrating radar to map structures beneath the ice, and the results have occasionally included geometric patterns and linear features that resist easy natural explanation. In most cases, these formations turn out to be sedimentary layers, pressure ridges, or artifacts of the radar processing itself. But reports of unusual findings occasionally surface in informal scientific communications before being resolved or quietly set aside. Every attempt to go deep, whether through drilling, radar mapping, or physical exploration, seems to encounter a threshold. A point beyond which the data becomes strange, the instruments behave unexpectedly, and the investigation is quietly discontinued. Whether this threshold is natural, a consequence of the extreme conditions at great depth, or whether it represents something deliberate, something constructed, is a question that remains open. The old Tibetan monks had a phrase for it. the breath of the hidden world. They said that as you descended toward Agartha, the air would change. It would become warmer, drier, and carry a faint vibration that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. The closer you came to the hidden kingdom, the more your instruments would fail, not because they were broken, but because the energy of the inner world operated on principles that surface technology could not process. Whether you interpret that as mysticism or as a metaphorical description of electromagnetic interference at extreme depth, the parallel to modern field reports is striking. Deep Earth acoustics is a young and rapidly evolving field. As instruments become more sensitive, researchers have begun detecting subtler signals from within the planet, sounds and vibrations that were invisible to earlier technology. Some of these signals are well understood. Others resist easy explanation, particularly those that exhibit regular patterns or harmonic structures not easily attributed to known geological processes. Ancient texts describe something that resonates, at least metaphorically, with these modern explorations. Sumerian writings reference sacred objects in Enki's temple at Eridu associated with the preservation of knowledge. Egyptian priests of Memphis spoke of Heka, the power of spoken words, which some esoteric traditions have interpreted as the idea that speech could be preserved in stone. Tibetan chronicles of Shambhala describe chambers where the wisdom of the past endures in forms beyond ordinary writing. Whether these are metaphors for oral tradition, poetic descriptions of sacred space, or dim echoes of real acoustic phenomena that ancient peoples encountered in deep caves, the honest answer is that we do not know. Somewhere beneath the crust, the planet carries a library written not in symbols, but in vibration. The old myths called it the living archive, a place where memory hums rather than sleeps. If true, the machines that never stopped may not be engines of power at all. They may be devices of preservation, systems that store the language, history, and instructions of a world that came before. The hum continues, inaudible but measurable, threading through mountains, ocean floors, and the frozen continent. It speaks in rhythm, not in words. The earth remembers everything. There is one more thread to follow before we let the night carry us away. The Schumann resonance. In 1952, the German physicist Winfried Otto Schumann predicted that the space between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere would act as a waveguide, trapping electromagnetic waves at specific frequencies. His calculations were confirmed experimentally in 1960. The fundamental frequency was measured at approximately 7.83 Hz, and it has hummed at that pitch, more or less consistently ever since. It is the electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet, sustained by the roughly 2,000 thunderstorms occurring globally at any given moment. Each lightning strike sends energy into the cavity between ground and sky, and the accumulated effect is a standing wave that envelops the Earth. What most people do not know is that this frequency has been shifting. Historically stable, the Schumann resonance has shown anomalous spikes in recent years, occasionally reaching 12, 14, even 36 Hz in brief bursts that no one has fully explained. Some researchers attribute these spikes to changes in solar activity or ionospheric density. Others point to the increasing complexity of human electromagnetic emissions, the web of radio waves, cellular signals, and digital communications that now saturates the atmosphere. But a few researchers working at the intersection of geophysics and electromagnetic theory have raised an intriguing question. If deep geological structures can produce electromagnetic signals, and if the Schumann resonance acts as a global waveguide, could the two systems interact? Could energy from deep within the Earth modulate the electromagnetic field above it? This is speculative, and no peer-reviewed study has demonstrated such a connection. But it illustrates how the boundaries between established science and speculative inquiry can blur when we turn our attention to the deep Earth. The correlation mirrors, with uncanny precision, the ancient descriptions of a world where the surface and the interior are connected by sound, by vibration, by the hum of a system designed to hold everything in balance. The Vedic texts describe this balance as Uttha, the cosmic order that governs the movement of stars, the flow of rivers, and the rhythm of the seasons. When Uttha is disturbed, the world suffers. When it is restored, life flourishes. The instrument of this restoration, according to the hymns, is Agni, the sacred fire that dwells within the earth and rises through vibration to sustain the heavens. Agni is not merely a god, Agni is a process, a mechanism, a hum. In Chinese philosophy, the concept of qi, The vital energy that flows through all living things also flows through the Earth itself, along pathways called dragon lines. These lines, mapped by geomancers for thousands of years, follow the contours of mountains, rivers and underground springs. Where the lines converge, temples are built. Where they diverge, the land is considered barren. The entire system is based on the idea that the Earth is alive, that it pulses with energy, and that human well-being depends on aligning with that pulse. Western science has its own version. Telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust, were first documented in the 19th century when telegraph operators noticed that their lines sometimes carried signals without any human transmission. These currents are driven by changes in the Earth's magnetic field, by solar-wind interactions with the ionosphere, and by the slow movement of conducting fluids in the mantle. They are real, measurable, and powerful enough to affect human technology. What the ancients described as chi, as arta, as the breath of the hidden world, modern science calls telluric currents and Schumann resonances. The vocabulary has changed. The phenomenon has not. The Earth pulses with energy. The question is whether that energy is purely natural, a consequence of the planet's internal heat and magnetic field, or whether it was once, long ago, harnessed and directed by beings who understood it better than we do. If you're still awake, still listening, still following this thread into the dark, consider this final thought. If a civilization existed before the Younger Dryas, one that possessed knowledge we have only recently begun to recover, what would their monuments look like? They would not be on the surface. They knew the surface was vulnerable. They had seen the fires, the floods, the ice. Their monuments would be inside the earth, carved into bedrock, sealed within crystal, encoded in the vibrational structure of stone, invisible to the eye, inaudible to the ear, but detectable to anyone with the right instruments and the patience to listen. Perhaps we are those listeners. Perhaps the instruments we have built, the seismographs, the magnetometers, the deep-sea microphones, are the first crude tools capable of hearing what was left for us. Not a message in words, a message in frequency, a pulse that says we were here, we survived, and so can you. Or perhaps the pulse is nothing more than the sound of a planet turning in the dark, indifferent to the stories we tell about it. Both possibilities are humbling, both deserve our attention. Let us now come to rest. Let the narrative settle like sediment in still water. What have we found in this long descent through myth and measurement, through legend and laboratory data? Not proof, not a map with an X marking the entrance to a hidden empire, but something subtler and perhaps more valuable, a whisper that repeats in different voices across 12,000 years of human memory. The Sumerians remembered it, the Tibetans described it, the Hopi carried the memory through generations of oral tradition, the Greeks encoded it in mythology, the Indian sages wrote it into their oldest scriptures, and now, in the 21st century, our instruments are beginning to pick up echoes of the same story. Perhaps it is all coincidence. Perhaps the myths are universal fantasies, and the readings are geological noise. That is the simplest explanation, and simplicity is the foundation of good science. But there is another possibility, one that does not require belief, only openness. The possibility that the Earth remembers what we have forgotten, that the answers we seek about our origins lie not in the stars above, but in the silence below, that somewhere beneath the crust, in chambers of crystal and stone, the memory of who we once were is waiting, not lost, not destroyed, simply stored, in the most durable archive the planet can offer. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all, not whether the empire beneath the Earth is real, but what it means that we keep looking for it. Across every age, every culture, every continent, human beings have stared at the ground and imagined that something greater lies below, that the surface, with all its chaos and impermanence, is not the whole story, that beneath the noise, beneath the wars and the floods and the forgetting, there is a foundation, a bedrock not just of stone but of memory. We build cities, they crumble, we write books, they burn, we carve names into granite and the wind erases them grain by grain. Everything on the surface is temporary, and yet we persist. We rebuild, we rewrite, we remember what we can and mourn what we cannot. And through it all, the earth beneath us holds steady. It does not forget, it does not hurry, it simply endures. That is not a myth, that is geology, that is physics, that is the oldest truth there is, steady. Patient, unbroken, the signals go on. Somewhere in the dark, the machines that never stopped still turn. If this story stayed with you tonight, A-Like helps others find these journeys in the dark. More ancient mysteries wait in the playlist, and you can continue whenever you are ready. Share your thoughts below. What do you think lies beneath our feet? I read everyone, and I am always curious. Until next time, wherever you are in the world, whatever hour the clock shows, sleep well and dream deep. Good night.